the day of the Union budget. Now, I know that you are listening to a lot of very wise people looking at the data, the figures, the deficits, the projections, what has got outlays, what hasn't got outcomes promised in the last budget. All that you will get from experts of the economy and budget making. For someone like me, my vantage point is politics. So let me give you some highlights as I see from this very voluminous document that give us signals on political economy for the country and also for Modi government's approach to political economy. Because as we keep saying again and again and again, behind everything that happens in a democracy is politics. 1991 economic reform happened because of politics. Nevertheless, what is it that we see now? Now, a finance minister presenting a budget in an election year, in fact, any year in India can be an election year, but particularly on the eve of an election, as it's happening now. In fact, within less than a fortnight, the first round of voting in Uttar Pradesh will take place. So, a finance minister presenting the budget on the eve of a major election braces herself for that familiar charge. This is an election budget. Huh? What do you expect? How does Nirmala Sitharaman's latest budget pass this test? That is what we are examining today in this special episode of Cut the Clutter. Now let's steal the answer from Sir Humphrey Appleby's playbook. Remember from Yes Minister, which is it is an election budget and it isn't. The answer depends on your perspective, where you are coming from and what you have in mind. But we are not hiding behind bureaucracies, and I will explain to you how. Because this is not an election budget in the sense that it might target the voter in the coming elections. No large yojanas, no giveaways for farmers, which means Uttar Pradesh, Western Uttar Pradesh, or Punjab. No increase in direct benefit transfers to the poor, which means not in any particular eye on Eastern Uttar Pradesh, which is a large swath of poverty. No direct benefit transfers or other relief payouts, and definitely nothing by way of tax breaks or exemptions for the middle class voters. That's a very important thing because therein lies an important aspect of the Modi Shah BJP's politics. Now, if you look beyond this round of state elections that begin in less than a fortnight now and tilt the periscope to gaze at the more distant horizon, you can see how the Modi government wishes things looking by the summer of 2024, which is still 2.5 years away. They'd want growth maintaining at least 7% plus clip, generating jobs, lifting current economic malaise, because right now everybody is tired and fatigued, right? Not just because of the illness which has swept through our population once again, but also because we've seen an economic downturn for quite some time. It began pre-pandemic. Did not just begin with the pandemic in 2020. 3 years before that, our economic growth had begun to decline. So we are tired right now. There is an economic malaise. So government wants that changing at least by the summer of 2024 because, that's when the next big general election will take place. That's why the massive rise in borrowings that this budget shows, this budget shows about 43% rise in borrowings compared to last year, which itself had sizable borrowings. In fact, under Modi government, over the past 7 years, we've seen India's borrowings go up 3 times. One has gone to 3. So this government borrows a lot, and now suddenly it is targeting to borrow a lot more. That might have also reflected in what you saw happening with the bond prices today. You saw bond yields going up. That is because the market is now anticipating that if the government is going to borrow 14.5 lakh crores this year, most of it from the market, there will be demand for debt and there will be pressure on debt markets. And that's why bond yields are going up, which is also a signal that interest rates will go up. So that's an important thing. Government is borrowing money. Now, they are borrowing. Why? Because they are putting emphasis on capital expenditure to build both hard physical infrastructure, which is also very visible, like highways, ports, railways, but also soft ones like optical fiber connectivity in rural areas, which they say they are going to do in PPP. And you can see where politicians are coming from. because what is hard and physical and visible, that's purely done by the government. What is mostly underground or hidden and what will benefit people ultimately does not particularly have to have the government's imprimatur all the time. But what is visible must have it. That is the difference between hard infrastructure and soft infrastructure. Economists read wisdom from data. We search for political messaging everywhere. Early on, with the rise of the Modi phenomenon, we had said that his politics rests on three central pillars, three key pillars. What are these? One is hard Hinduized nationalism. There's always an Indian nationalism, but government of the day can always try to redefine it. Modi government has been able to redefine it in a Hinduized way. So this is Hindu nationalism. So that is the first pillar, hard Hinduized nationalism. The second pillar is efficient and leak-proof delivery of direct benefits to the most poorest sections of the population. We've seen that happen with Ujjwala scheme, with PM Kisan, with PM Samman, with Gram Awas, and so many other yojanas, where the combination of Aadhaar and bank accounts and telephony, mobile telephony, has been used quite effectively. And the third is building hard, visible infrastructure. The fact is that well into its eighth year now, the most visible infra showpieces Modi government has built are in the area of highways and expressways. And how important that is to Narendra Modi, you can see by the frequency with which you see him landing on these expressways in pole-bound states, essentially UP, on Indian Air Force aircraft. That is to say that, look, the past governments did not even give you highways on which you could drive your trucks properly or your motorbikes properly. I'm giving you highways on which you can land airplanes. So in politics, politicians need something to talk about, and he's chosen hard, visible infrastructure to be one of those things. You can also see that highways and expressways are the centerpiece of the BJP's campaign in Uttar Pradesh. That's why in this budget also, particularly with his high borrowings, a lot more money is going into the highways, which means the third pillar of Modi government's electoral proposition is being concretized further. The first two he manages with direct messaging and efficient delivery, as we had said. Now, Rahul Gandhi and other critics are absolutely right to say that the budget is nothing for the salaried and middle classes. The message is again a familiar one, and we know it. If only the critics of Modi government would accept that one harsh reality, that for the Hindu middle class, from traders to the self-employed and definitely the salaried classes, they are the largest committed vote bank for Narendra Modi. He needs to do nothing to buy their votes. He is their default choice. They vote for him compulsively. That's why when we said once that the middle class was the Modi Shah BJP's Muslims, we didn't mean any offense either to the Hindus or the Hindu middle class or the Muslims. We were just making a political point, if in a somewhat raw and brute manner. Because it was plain speak to the extent that just as Muslims vote for any secular force that they think might be able to keep the BJP restrained, the middle class now votes for the BJP Modi Hindutva to keep the secular, translated as pro-Muslim forces, out. Translated by them, not by me. Translated by them as pro-Muslim forces out. The middle classes, especially the salaried groups, have now voluntarily excluded themselves from any budget goodies. Their concerns are no longer material. They are into other concerns right now, which are more ideological, philosophical, religious, sectarian. You can choose your description depending on where you are coming from. We must also acknowledge a certain middle class approach to this government's management of the economy. Of course, no finance minister can follow all our mother's cardinal principle for managing our household budgets, which is that either spend less than you earn or earn more than you spend, because most powerful economies in the world do run on deficits. It's a question of how prudently you manage them and where do you spend your money, your revenues, and run up those deficits. To begin with, Nirmala Sitharaman's tax collections under all categories have exceeded estimates by some impressive distance. This includes corporate taxes, where rates were reduced drawing expected criticism of handouts for rich corporates, that Modi government is stealing from the poor and giving to the rich. Now, the fact is, evidence is available to you if more evidence was needed, although non believers will not be convinced even now that lower and moderate taxation actually leads to higher compliance and higher tax collections. So, good thing is this time no more taxes have been increased. There's been much well meaning but bad advice floating in the pandemic era. Tax the rich more heavily, tax inheritance of their children, tax their tax paid wealth yet again, and tax them maybe for the size of the windows in their homes, and of course the number and pedigree of the pets they keep in their homes. Jo bahana mile, you tax people more. These ideas have been floating. Also, you must invent super taxes for the super rich because the number of super rich is going up. That is what Oxfam and Piketty and all the rest are telling you. Don't you believe them? Don't you take them seriously? So just tax the rich at maybe 300%, which means start confiscating whatever wealth they have collected all this while. Never mind that this wealth has been collected after paying taxes on their incomes. Now we know that these ideas are economically ruinous but also politically tempting. It's a safe presumption that anything that seems to crush the toes of the rich pleases the poor. The finance minister, therefore, deserves our appreciation for tossing these bad ideas out. Now, it is often said that strongmen, populist leaders, read from the same playbook. Narendra Modi's actions, or many of his actions, might conform to some of these elements of the strongman populist leaders' playbook. But to one they don't, and that is fiscal profligacy and monetary arrogance. For example, look at an Erdogan in Turkey. Fiscal deficit, inflation, both have been moderate. Exchange rates and interest rates, which is also another name of monetary policy, are not influenced beyond a threshold, and the irresistible tax and spend temptation is firmly resisted. Because we know how tax and spend almost always ends up becoming tax and spray, and that is ruinous for everybody, rich and the poor. And any year in India can be an election year. So you don't need an excuse of this being an election year or that being an election. The message, therefore, for our political economy is clear. And the message is it is still a fiscally responsible government playing the long game. Now, if this government is borrowing and investing, what return is it expecting on its investment? That return is that this investment should translate into growth, which further translates into votes in 2024. To that extent, it is reasonable politics. It is an election budget for sure, but only if your perspective is 2024, not 2022.